You are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy, episode 64. Today, I am going to be interviewing my friend and colleague, Coach Lori Lander. Lori is a female empowerment coach, and today we're going to talk about 5 ways to practice self-love. Let's dive in. This is a podcast for overthinkers, overdoers, and overachievers who are tired of feeling overanxious and just want to feel better. I'm your host, certified life coach, Jackie DeCrenis. So I have a very special guest on the podcast today. Her name is Lori Lander, and she is my dear friend and also a certified life coach. And Lori is a woman who helps women who feel disconnected, unfulfilled, and stuck in their lives. She helps people create a new chapter filled with purposeful work, meaningful relationships, and connections for a like-minded tribe. She specializes in female empowerment while uplifting women to help them realize their full potential to thrive and live vibrant, authentic lives. And as a mother of 3 girls, she has passionately dedicated her adult life to female empowerment. She believes that now more than ever, it's vital for women to uphold core values, embrace uniqueness, and stand in their integrity. And that is why in 2009, she founded Girls in the Know, a 501c3 nonprofit, which educates and empowers preteen girls alongside trusted adults by providing them with tools to establish a strong sense of self as they mature into adulthood. And with that, I want to welcome my dear friend, Lori.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. This is so fun.
It is.
So Lori and I, we met many years ago in our coaching program and in one of our first coaching programs together and became fast friends. And you are located in St. Louis and I am in Maui. And yet we carve out the time almost every week to get on the phone and share best practices and talk about our business and talk about our families. And it's just been an amazing long distance friendship over Zoom.
It's been wonderful. And I was so blessed for me and my family to come and visit this summer, which was wonderful to see you all.
I loved it. So much fun. So, Lori, we are both life coaches. I'm more of a general life coach than you are. You really have a beautiful niche with women's empowerment. And I know that you love to focus on helping that, whether it's middle-aged or career woman, really finding the joy in her life and really reinventing, even if she has a career, stepping into her power to help increase her business or increase her joy or find that work-life balance piece. And one of the biggest things you talk about in your practice is self-compassion. Mm-hmm. That's a huge theme. And I thought that for today's podcast, I would love to talk both about self-compassion, but also in the 5 ways you talk about practicing self-love.
Yes. I'm so excited to talk about this. I talk about it with all my clients, and it is, I think, one of my favorite topics because I truly believe it is so important. But I want to start with, what is self-love essentially? And although you can look it up, and just read, how it is defined, I think that there's so many different meanings for it. I myself find self-love to be really putting myself first and appreciating myself and my self-worth and my value. And I think that that really is so incredibly important. It's something that I've learned over the years. And since learning it now, I do try to teach that a lot, try to talk about it a lot and share it with my clients and friends and family, because I believe so deeply that we have to take a pause and love ourselves first before we can love anyone else in our lives. But putting on your own oxygen mask first, as you've heard so many times before, but I think that it's true. And in this regard, it is critical for us as we go through our life to give that love to ourselves first and foremost, before, again, we can give it out to anybody else and share it with anybody. I also believe that it's the way we as women have been raised. We have been raised to, not to be, too boisterous about, our accomplishments and to kind of lay low and to help others and serve others. And there really was not much talk at all. I didn't even know what self-love was as a child. I've never even had heard that term since I was in maybe my 20s, maybe even my early 30s. I don't know. So also new to me, but I think especially as women, that's how we were raised. We were raised to put everyone else before ourselves and our needs. And so that's why it's just critical now that, to focus on these components of self-love and really shine more of a light on it, talk more about it.
So what have you seen in terms of women who have always put everyone else first? Their parents, their siblings, their husband or partner, their children, their job. What do you typically see? What are the common denominators of somebody who is not practicing self-love?
Such a great question. And I see that often with the clients when they first come to me. A lot of it is anxiety, extreme anxiety. It's stress. It's overwhelm. It's lack of confidence. It's just physically, not only emotionally too, but just physically drained. Because, as we know, we can't pour from an empty cup. We've got to fill our own cups first. So those are really the bigger signs of what I see when people first come to me, is that they are essentially drained. There is no more gas in their tank. They have given it all away, but yet they haven't learned how to fill up the tank, fill up the cup with what they need.
And I imagine there is great discomfort when they first learn that their homework, if you will, is to practice self-love. Like, it sounds good on paper. Oh, great, I get to practice self-love. Oh, great, I get to think about myself first. Oh, great, I don't have to put everybody else first. And then there's the fantasy of that. And then there's the practicality of shifting that gear that is so societally in our DNA, and the habit of having not practiced self-love and putting everyone else first for decades. So tell me a little bit about that, like the shift of, oh, really, I'm allowed to put myself first, to the actual doing. What kind of pushback do you see? What kind of discomfort do you see?
Yeah. Well, first, it's helping them define what that means for them. Because again, very different meanings for every single one of us, and again, for me, and I'll list some of the things that are most important for me and how what I believe defines self-love. But I think first it's them gaining clarity on what helps them feel good about themselves. They do, what have they done in their past that has helped them to feel better about themselves, and really to go back to success leaves clues. And once they have a deeper understanding of, well, gosh, when I did this, that really made me feel good. I haven't done it in a long time, but that really made me feel good. So once they start to, kind of feel like they're connecting again to what they used to do, and that connection of, wow, when I did this, I felt better. That's that feeling that they get. They start to get a better understanding of what self-love actually is. And once they have that understanding, then that's where we start to make the shifts. And very slowly, it takes time. It certainly doesn't happen overnight or in one session, but for them to, start to step into that and to take baby steps, maybe even one step forward, which can be very small, and just identifying what it is that brings them joy, that's going to help them to feel better about themselves, to pour into themselves.
I love that. Do you ever come across somebody who has spent, either due to circumstances beyond their control in childhood, or being in toxic relationships their entire life, or just having been a workhorse? Do you ever find that somebody has no idea what brings them joy and never did?
Oh my gosh, this is such a great, great question. I'm so glad you bring this up. It's so interesting. Early on in my practice, when I started doing this work, and I would start to ask, I remember one client, what brings you joy? And it was like someone staring at me like a deer in headlights. Like, I don't even know what brings me joy. No idea. I'm so busy going and doing for my family, for my friends, for my community, with work. I don't have time for joy. Are you kidding me? And that's actually a piece of what I talk about. But yes, it is very common. And so it's really important for them to really take a step back, to take a pause, and to allow themselves the time and the space, again, to go back in their lives to where they had that joy, to figure out what fueled them, what brought them more energy, what helped fill their cup versus what left them feeling drained, and to do more of what fills them up. But it's practice, but first starting with an awareness and clarity that it's possible.
Great, great. So let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit about the 5 ways to practice self-love, or that you would recommend the 5 ways to practice self-love.
Of course. Well, I think one of them that's super important that we all have heard about many times is self-care, and really ensuring, and that too is defining what self-care looks like for you. For me, I'll give you some examples, but daily affirmations, for example, I wake up every morning and I say 1 or 2, just a couple of affirmations, starting with I am, and it really helps me kind of set my focus for the day. And then I'm able to step into it and start live by that. So daily affirmations, I recommend them. Other people call them invocations. It's a form of an affirmation, but it can be very, very powerful. Another form of self-care is gratitude. And I know that we hear that, we talk about it a ton, I know with coaching, but the reason why it's talked about so much is because it works. It works. It shifts our mind and our focus on what we're grateful for versus all of maybe the negatives that are going on in our lives. So I think it's really important, whether you do it first thing in the morning or at night before you go to bed, but even if it's one thing a day, not only writing it down, but leaning into the feelings about whatever it is that you're talking about, whatever you wrote down that you're grateful for. Another piece of the self-care is exercise,
100%. And by the way, I'm like nodding my head like a crazy person. Obviously, we're not on video, so we can't see, but 100%. I agree with all 3 of these, and fantastic reminders. And the exercise piece is so crucial.
It is. And I mean, I can go down, my list, but meditation, is another important piece of it, and getting enough water and sleep, eating healthy, and celebrating your wins. I think that that's something really important that a lot of people struggle with doing. I think is so critically important with self-care is celebrating. And no matter how small the win, it doesn't mean you have to run a marathon or, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be something as small as I just meditated for 1 minute. Take a pause if you did that and you're not used to doing it, and celebrate yourself and say, you did it. You did it. You put your mind to it. You said you were going to do it and you did it. Because I think that oftentimes we get so caught up in what we didn't accomplish that, that's where we go. So we want to make sure we're shifting our mindset over to the wins. And another piece of self-care, which I think is important, and I sometimes time block it in at my schedule, is to simply do nothing. I mean, I will write it into my calendar that I just want an hour to do nothing. If I end up kind of falling into something else, great, but it's just having white space in my day. Another piece.
I love that. Yeah. The celebrating the wins, going back on that, something I've talked about in prior podcasts. There's a book, a New York Times bestseller, a book called Make Your Bed. It was written by a rear admiral in the Navy. And the power of making your bed every morning gives you that first win of the day. And what he talks about is if you accomplish nothing else, in order to make your bed, you have to get out of your bed, by the way. So at least you're awake, you're out of your bed. So you're actually 3 wins. And then you've made your bed. And the idea is that you've accomplished something and you've started a routine, which again goes into, the other books like Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits, all of which are kind of foundations for the type of work I do, which is just having good daily habits so that you have a good mindset for the day. But making your bed is a win. And even if you have a lousy, terrible day or an unproductive day, or, you lose a client or you had a fender bender or something like that, you come home at the end of the day, your bed is made, you're reminded again, I accomplished something today.
Yes. So good. Yes.
And then of course, one accomplishment usually attracts another accomplishment because you're like, I did that, so I could probably do this.
Yes, very much so.
So I love that. I love the celebrating the little wins. And I think, again, going back to women in society, we so often were shamed a little bit for celebrating ourselves because bragging is like not a good thing. And you never want to talk about, yourself too much, but there's a difference. And I think you should speak to it on what does it mean to celebrate a win without being braggy.
Right. I mean, I think that you summed it up, but essentially it's literally celebrating. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to get on a loudspeaker or you need to get onto social and tell the world that, for example, you just made your bed, but it's really turning it inward and just acknowledging what you have accomplished, no matter how small. no matter how small.
Which comes full circle back to this topic, which is the self-love. So you're not making your bed so that somebody will compliment you that you make your bed. You're making your bed for your own satisfaction.
You're not looking out there. You're going inward for the accolades, which is really important. So that's number one. The second piece is, which I think is so important too, is learning to say no. Really say no. And I heard this, probably about 8 years ago from another coach that said, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. And it's always resonated with me. And really it was a light bulb moment for me because it made me realize, wow, how many things do I say yes to out of obligation or because I have committed in the past or simply because I feel bad about hurting someone else's feelings?
Yeah.
And this was a huge shift for me really in my own life. And I've been teaching this quite a bit to my clients on practicing what I call a great strategy is practicing the power of the pause. And rather than that knee-jerk reaction, as most of us like to do, is sure, absolutely, sounds great. Yes, definitely count me in. To be careful and be conscious that from now on, you will say, let me get back with you, and I know this may sound simple, but for many, it's not so simple. And just by practicing that pause, and even if it's 5 minutes, it gives you just a moment to give yourself an opportunity to respond versus reacting. And, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say it ties in so beautifully to scheduling your white space.
Yeah.
Because I did an episode called The Power of the Pause, but the power of the pause was all about like, if you're tired, take a nap. If you need to re-energize yourself, meditate for 5 minutes, pause before reacting to something, negative. So this is a great reminder for people like me, because the way my perfectionism or recovering perfectionism manifests is not procrastination, which is a typical form of perfectionism. Mine is let me do it as fast as I can so that it's off my plate. It's the other end of the spectrum, but it's the same disorder. And so when people text me, I text immediately back with a firm answer. And I don't even pause to think, do I want to, can I, don't I? I want to respond quickly. And I do the same with emails, and I tend to do the same with phone calls and mostly with invitations. And so this reminder, that power of the pause, is such a good one. To take a beat. Let me check my calendar. Let me get back to you. That sounds fun. I'm not sure yet.
Exactly.
So good.
Even if you may want to do it, give yourself a little time, because I think what's really eye-opening, another exercise you could do is to go and take a look at your calendar, even a week out from here to a week from now, and circle all the things, the commitments that you have on your calendar that are things that you don't necessarily want to do, but you did it out of obligation or commitment. You're not jazzed up about it, but you just feel like if you don't, you're a bad person. And it'd be interesting to see how many circles you have on your calendar. And then moving forward, be more clear about what you actually schedule in, because it's important. Of course, we're going to have things that we need to go to from time to time. But for the most part, I can say I have gotten to the point in my life to where when I look at my calendar now, almost everything on there is now a hell yes. And it takes some time to get there. And it comes with a lot of boundaries, which I'm about to talk to. That's number 3. But just to be intentional with your commitments moving forward. So important.
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
I know I'll jump right into number 3, which is setting healthy boundaries. I didn't know if you had any questions though, before I move on.
No. Please.
Okay, great.
And boundaries is it's just one of my favorite topics, because it's one of the hardest things for women, especially to navigate. Because again, when we're sort of conditioned to always serve others or meet other people's needs or, be the matriarch of the family or whatever it is, we tend to not have any boundaries. And the fastest way to burn out is no boundaries. So I can't wait to get into this one.
Yes, it's so very true. Oh, burnout. Yes, very, very common. And not just necessarily boundaries with others, but I think also boundaries with yourself. Just getting really clear and living a more intentional life all the way around. But yes, if someone has treated you in a certain way, of course, we don't have control over their actions, or how they respond, but we absolutely have control over how we choose to respond, how we choose to show up, and the boundaries that we choose to set. So if in fact it's removing ourselves from that situation to set a boundary, or what I call having a courageous conversation with that individual and saying to them, this really hurt me, laying it down and saying, if this continues, I'm going to remove myself from this situation. And the key here is, though, with setting boundaries is they're not one and done. You have to continue the practice for some time before it will stick. So just kind of, take caution in when you do set it and then somebody oversteps and then you say, they're not respecting my boundaries. It's just because they haven't yet learned, and it does take some time. So remembering to practice, be consistent, to continue to remind them that, this is hurting me, it's upsetting me. So that's being boundaries with others. And then setting boundaries with yourself on your own time, on your own schedule, going back up. Have I allowed self-love? Well, if I haven't been taking care of myself, and I need to set a hard boundary on what I'm going to be saying yes to, going to number 2 of saying no to things. So it goes both ways, but being really clear about really defining your limits in your life.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah. So moving on to number 4, my fourth one I believe is really powerful is to do, we talked about this a little bit, but to do one thing joyful every day.
Yeah.
Whatever that means to you. And I do believe joy is a superpower. I always have.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it can shift everything by just even simply taking a moment to play with your dogs, or I don't know, sitting down and doing a jigsaw puzzle. I personally love puzzles, so that always brings me joy. Yeah. But, defining what it is that brings you joy first, but then making sure you calendar it in. Make sure you actually write it down and make sure you do it daily.
Well, I would take it one step further, which is, and relish the joy when you're doing it. Because I think what often happens, and people talk about this all the time, people love that first sip of coffee a day, right? Or tea or whatever your thing is in the morning. And yet they love it. They look forward to it and they don't relish it. They rush through it, right? Instead of when you make that first cup of coffee or that first cup of tea or lemon water or whatever your drink of the morning is, sitting in the moment and having the gratitude piece for it.
Yes. So
like, I'm so grateful to have this hot, wonderful, delicious smelling liquid or cold smoothie or whatever your drink is. And just taking a beat of gratitude in that I get to have this right now.
Yes.
And that's a joy. This podcast, which is called The Overthinker's Guide to Joy, used to be called Joy Hunting. The premise of it was, what can you do every day in your life that might be kind of ordinary, where you can find joy and pay attention to it? Where can you hunt for joy? And so this is a great reminder of that. Thank you.
Really is. And I'll add to that too, that there may be times where you physically cannot do something joyful. It just physically is not in your day for some reason, if we can't carve out time. But there is always an opportunity to at least think or write down other joyful moments, because we'll still be able to then feel those feelings, as you talked about, savoring the moment. Those feelings will come right back. So if you can't physically do it, hopefully you can every day. But if you can't, to just simply sit in that, remembering the cup of coffee, and will elicit those feelings. So it's very possible, a good reminder. And then the 5th piece is one of my most favorite topics is self-compassion. And I think that's such an important form of self-love. Cannot stress it enough. And I really believe that showing compassion towards yourself, although can be challenging at first. I know at first it was for me. It felt a little funny, but so critically important. And for those of you who aren't quite sure how to show yourself self-compassion, a great example is to imagine that a friend or a loved one is suffering, and you go to them and you talk to them with just love and care and love on them, and give them whatever it is that they need in that moment. And then you take whatever it is that you said to that person in a time that you're struggling, you take everything that you said and you turn it inward and you say it to yourself. Is a great example of providing self-compassion for oneself, especially in a time of struggle, so that we're acknowledging our feelings, that we're not stuffing them, that we're there for ourselves. So such an important part of self-love. And there is an amazing book that I recommend that I loved. I learned a lot from. I know, Jackie, I had turned you on to it.
Yeah, I was just going to say you gave me one of the best books on self-compassion, but tell everyone else.
And it's written by the pioneer of self-compassion, Dr. Kristen Neff. There is a lot in the book. So what I tell clients is to take from the book what speaks to you and leave the rest in the book. Because there's a lot there. There are some golden nuggets that for me, and I know for many of my clients, have been game changers. So I strongly recommend it. The name of the book by Dr. Kristen Neff is Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And I highly recommend getting that book, whether it be Audible or otherwise, but really a great read. Great read.
Yeah, you recommended that to me when we first met years ago. I've read it twice and it is quite dense. And yet, like you said, there's just so many nuggets in it. And you really do have to just take out the pieces that you love and kind of own them. And that was my first introduction to that concept of self-compassion. And I loved it. And I'm grateful to you for that book recommendation.
Of course. So good. So these are my five ways to practice. Of course, there are many other ways. So I think it's important for all of us just to take pause and figure out, what does self-love mean to you? And figure out what are practices that you can put into place daily that are going to help you pour into yourself to give you that love, to really help you to appreciate yourself and to value yourself and all your self-worth and worthiness that you have.
Well, and let's talk about what is the return on investment, if you will, of practicing self-love?
Such a great question. Such a beautiful question. So your ROI for practicing self-love, there are actually a lot of benefits to it. But what I've found is mindfulness, really, really leaning into mindfulness. I think it definitely helps in relieving stress and anxiety and overwhelm. I think those are really the three big ones that I've found that really help quite a bit with myself and my clients. And really pouring into yourself, giving yourself what it is that you truly need so that you don't feel that feeling that we've all had where we feel that feeling of depletion. It fills you up so that you feel energetic and you feel like whatever's coming your way, you're able to handle it. And I also feel like it really helps tremendously with resilience. So there's a lot of factors, a lot of benefits to practicing self-love that I think that we all can continue to learn from. I will say, and I will stress, it is a daily practice. I wish it were done. It is a daily practice all across the board.
For my listeners, they know in every single episode of this podcast, everything I talk about is a daily practice.
I bet.
On a little micro level. Like it's never a big swing. It's always a tiny little baby step. And it's always a daily practice.
Yeah.
The thing that was coming to mind for me on one of the other benefits or return of investment of the practice of self-love is when we develop a healthy relationship with ourselves. Yes. That is one in which daily self-compassion is exercised and one in which daily self-love elements, like all the ones you gave, are exercised. We start to attract healthier relationships, prosperity, and actually even physically good health into our lives because it starts with the foundation we create for ourselves. And that's not why we do it. You don't practice self-love so that you can then get external reward. I believe it's an ancillary benefit. You can't possibly have true success. You might have money, you might have relationships, you might have elements of success, but true success starts with a foundation of self-love.
Very much so. Oh my gosh. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Greater happiness, greater relationships all across the board. And just overall, really impacting your overall well-being, I think is tied very closely with practicing self-love.
I agree.
Loving on yourself hard, right?
Exactly. Lori, this has been so much fun. As always, I love talking to you and I love hearing, your philosophies and your coaching techniques. I mean, I've heard them so many times, and yet every time I hear them again for the first time. And I'm reminded, oh yeah, I got to practice that. I forgot that one. So thank you for sharing these. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. I adore you. And I think that so many people will benefit from hearing this. And it might be for their first time. It might be for their 1,000th time. And yet it's always a good reminder to hit the reset button and go into this daily practice of self-love. So thank you for sharing this with us today.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure. And I truly enjoyed being here.
Lori, tell us how people can get in touch with you if they want to start working with you.
Of course. So the best way is via email, Lori, Lori, at lorilandercoaching.com. You can also visit my website, lorilandercoaching.com.
Perfect. And you work with one-on-one clients, women of all ages, and anyone looking for more joy, more empowerment, more peace, more success in their life.
You got it. Thank you.
Love it. All right. We will talk soon, and I'll see you later. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Overthinker's Guide to Joy. If you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe or follow this podcast so you can always be in the know when the next episode drops. If you would like to learn more about working with me as a coach, you can connect with me through my website at jackiedecrenis.com. That's JACKIEDECRINIS.com.